The peasants are simply attempting to overthrow the rich and take their share of wealth and power. They even claim that the Bible supports them in this. They say, well, the Bible says the meek shall inherit the earth, and we're meek, and so we're now in the process of inheriting the earth. It's hard to overestimate the drama of a situation like this. Most peasant revolts in the early modern period were simply furious, undirected, unthought-out riots of starving, impoverished people who were rejecting, maybe a wage freeze or taxes or other cruel treatment by the leaders of society and by the landlords. And peasant revolts are always crushed and always amount to very little, although causing much chaos, destruction, and death. This is the first time that a peasant revolt, or in fact any kind of revolt, had adopted religious ideas as a kind of ideology to claim a whole lot more than exactly what their agenda was. How many of the peasants actually believed that these ideas of Luther were spurring them on, and how many were just, cynically using them? There's no way to know. It is interesting to note that, the revolt is led by a number of Lutheran preachers, and these Lutheran ideas are certainly filtering into the masses through the preachers. What the preachers' motivations, intentions were, again, is not clear because there are no records about it. But the peasant war, as it's called, peasant revolt, is a traumatic event in German history. Even today, it's remembered as a disaster. And in those days, it just changed the course of the entire Reformation. When Luther heard what was happening, think about Luther's reaction to the Wittenberg situation, which was a relatively small-scale explosion of extreme activity using his ideas as a foundation and basis. But now you got a massive popular revolution sweeping across almost all of Germany, involving tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people using Luther's ideas as legitimacy. Well, Luther is horrified. Because politically and socially speaking, Luther is no revolutionary. Politically and socially speaking, Luther is a pretty conservative guy. And the first thing he sees, the first thing he believes, is that the peasants have heard his ideas and have totally misunderstood them, like many people in Wittenberg had. And certainly that was in part the case. Probably a number of peasants had just simply misunderstood Luther's ideas, or they'd been taught something about Luther's ideas that wasn't correct. So there is that possibility that there are a large number of people just mistaken about it. But it also dawns on Luther that his ideas are being used. They're being cynically used for purposes that aren't his at all and he would never support. And he starts to realize that the ideology of the Reformation, which is essentially his ideology, can be more than just transformative in the theological realm. It has the potential for being a socially revolutionary doctrine. And this frightens the stuffings out of Luther. Luther honestly believes, and most people in Luther's position at that time believed, that these peasants are inferior. They are an inferior class on earth. Maybe when they go to heaven they won't be, but now they're inferior. And he believed that totally and wasn't at all willing to change his position on that. He ended up writing 2 books, which he hoped would kind of end the peasant revolt, but I guess it's wishful thinking to hope that a book will end a social uprising like this. In the first book, his major message was that the Bible demanded that citizens obey their rulers, because those rulers are put on earth by God to rule. They are ordained by God to rule. It's part of God's intent and plan they rule, and that people have no right to rise up and overthrow these rulers. In fact, if you do rise up and overthrow them, you've essentially gone against the Bible and become I guess, a heretic. And I really think that was the core of Luther's political belief. But that didn't have any effect. No one really listened to that very much. His second book really shocked people. He came out and said, essentially, to the princes and rulers of Germany, this revolt by the peasants is not just illegitimate and dangerous. It's worse than that, because the peasants are inspired by the devil. So it's diabolical. And it's your duty to go out there and crush this rebellion and, kill peasants. The rulers then are glad to do that. They form armies together. They go out into the field. They crush the peasant revolt, slaughtering who knows how many thousands of peasants, making a huge impact on German society for many years to come.